The first character I want you to consider is Francis Bacon. He's best known for inventing empirical science. That is to say, have an idea, have a hypothesis, do some experiments to test it, collect all your data, form a new conclusion, form a new hypothesis, and just keep going. That's empirical science. And he could see the future. He thought, if we did this, if we actually tested this, he wrote this in 1624, right before he died, we could actually get a group of geniuses together and have them think, and what he called Solomon's house, come up with a new idea and test it and come up with a way better way of living. This is the house he lived in. It's privately held, think Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey-ish is around the corner, but I got permission to be on this land. And it was here in this house, he had gotten all the way to one of the most powerful men in England, then he lost all his prestige and was banished outside London. But on this land right here, looking out at this house, this is where he thought of empirical science. This is where he could see the future. And he had this amazing quote, now 400 years ago, "Let us hope there may spring helps to man, a line and race of inventions that may in some degree subdue and overcome the necessities and miseries of humanity." I know there's some orthopedic surgeons in the house tonight. Do you realize this guy's idea exactly 400 years ago are what we use all the time? We have a line and race of inventions that helps us overcome the miseries of mankind. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So within 40 years of Francis Bacon thinking about a Solomon's house, the first genius society in the world came about, the Royal Society. Who has here heard of the Royal Society? It's really the world's first genius society. It's founded in 1660, just 6 years before the Great Fire of London, 1666. But it was in 1665 that they formed their first journal, the world's first medical journal. And today it's just called Philosophical Transactions, but here's its real title, the Philosophical Transactions, giving some account of the present undertaking, studies, and labors of the ingenious in many considerable parts of the world. That's too long, right? And we can agree that that's too long, but it's been continuously published since 1665. And I've got to hold in my own hands the very first one of these. I got lucky with the production of my book. I had 8 research trips to Europe, and I got to go in archives and libraries, interview scientists and engineers, legendary doctors, and I got to go in the Royal Society. Actually got to go in there and hold in my own hands the works of Isaac Newton. Just amazing to think of these really, really curious people that made modernity possible. And they did it through the sharing of information for the first time ever. Smart people that never shared what they knew. Here's Isaac Newton's house. So Isaac Newton was one of the first president of the Royal Society. Next time you go to England, go through the trouble of going 3 hours north of London to Woolsthorpe, England. The day I went there, I was the only visitor there. His house is unchanged, and you just have this little apple orchard here in his front yard. And if you look out the window of Isaac Newton's bedroom, does anyone have any idea what kind of tree that is? That is actually the apple tree. It's died and been hit by lightning, and it springs back to life, so it's all craggly and ruined. But there's his apple tree, and I'll admit I picked an apple and collected the seeds. I have some seeds from some amazing trees around the world. But here in 1 year, as a 20-year-old guy, by himself, Cambridge was closed down because of the plague. Here's where Isaac Newton, here's his little light. Through that window is where the light came through, and he figured out the properties of light: red, orange, yellow, blue, green, indigo, violet, the prism. And in that room is where he also figured out the laws of thermodynamics and inertia, the tides, the motions of the moon, gravity, and calculus. One guy by himself invented all of that in 1 year in that room. It's worth going to if you're a science nerd, because it's like the greatest room in the world where the guy had the greatest productivity ever. And he didn't want to share it. That's my point. He held on to his secret of calculus, much to our chagrin, some of us in the room. He held on to that secret for over a decade. But it was the guys at the Royal Society who said, Isaac, why don't you come to London and share your ideas about the way the mathematical, the clockwork universe, as you call it, the way it works. He thought it was predictable, that you could predict how the world worked. Think about Isaac and where the other Brits were about 1,500 years before. They're trying to figure out where the sun is going to set on the summer solstice, and he's doing calculus by himself. His favorite student was Edmund Halley. Halley's Comet. To me, this is the day that the world became modern. People have different ideas. This is it for me. Edmund Halley had looked at the star charts, again, because they were sharing information. They're doing like we're doing tonight, where you get together and listen to someone. Edmund Halley looked at the star charts and the moon charts and said, I know it's been 400 years since we've had a solar eclipse in London. If my data are right, I'm predicting that there's going to be a full eclipse in London on April 22nd, 1715. And I think everyone should come to the Royal Society Clubhouse on Crane Court, and we'll watch the eclipse together. It had been 400 years. So he even made a little graph in the Philosophical Transactions and said, here you go. And he threw down the gauntlet and he said 9 a.m. He was off by half an hour. At 9:30 a.m., on April 22nd, 1715, there was a full eclipse. Did you guys see the full eclipse a couple years ago? The full eclipse? Who was there when it was the full eclipse? It is the spookiest thing ever, right? In the middle of the day, go completely dark. If you were a scientist, if you were a thinker back in 1715, I can't imagine how magical that moment would have been, that Halley called it and it came about. Because I think what it does is open up the vista. What else can we explain in our world if we share our information and talk about what we're capable of? So today, here, you can still go to Crane Court. Unfortunately, the Nazis bombed the actual clubhouse of the building, but these buildings are the same. That's what Crane Court, that alley, looked like. It's off to the side. It's actually not far from St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Thomas Sprat, in his history, said it's in Old English, they wanted nothing more, only the satisfaction of breathing a freer air and of conversing in quiet one with another without being engaged in the passions and madness of that dismal age. In other words, everyone's minds were starting to awaken that we could predict and know, and just like that early statue I showed you, nature is revealed through science, that's what they were digging at. They wanted to understand how the world worked. So these genius societies started springing up all over Europe. That's the one in France, that's the one in Paris, and the one in Italy. And with their telescopes and microscope, it's like this. Here's the funny thing. If you've got a massive telescope and you look at something really huge a long way away, it's almost like looking at something really, really close that's really, really tiny. And it ends up kind of being the same image, right? You got little blobs and big blobs. And it's like looking at cells versus looking at a faraway universe. And that's what the invention of clear glass got. So here's one of my favorite guys. Morgagni was a University of Padua professor. He had this idea, we talked about this a little bit earlier today. He had heard about these different case histories of people that had suffered and died, but it was really poorly organized, and there were hundreds of doctors who were contributors to this. He had this incredible idea. What I'm going to do with all my patients, who I can't help, because doctors were pointless even in the 1700s, not helping anybody, I'm going to we'll collect all the data. I'll listen to how they do, and then sprinkle in some physical exam. And then once they die, because they're all going to die, I'm going to cut them open and see what I find. He did it for 60 years, waiting to the very, very end to publish his masterpiece. It's called De Sedibus et Causis Moribundum per Anatomum Indigatus. And nerds just call it De Sedibus, the seat. It just means the seats and causes of disease. And what he did through massive genius was to take all their profiles and to listen to them and then catalog it and then make an index. His book was one of the first indexes in the world. And he realized he actually invented pathology, this guy. He did these 640 dissections, and he realized when people are suffering in one part of the body or not, it actually gives us a clue on what's going on in that part of the body. He's the guy that came up with what is causing a heart attack. He had patients that had this crushing chest pain, and then when they died, he cut them open and saw that their coronary arteries were filled with clot. Or if they had right lower abdominal pain. Every doctor in this room, and many of the people, all of you, are better thinking appendicitis. He's the guy. He's the guy to describe the appendix. That if something's wrong with your body, it's not that the stars are off, or that the gods are angry. It's that there's something freaking wrong with this little thing in your body. And he had this incredible quote, symptoms are nothing more than the groanings of suffering organs. He's the guy that figured out symptoms. If you're in this room and you have a sore throat and it hurts to swallow, you don't think that there's planetary misalignment. You think, I think I've got maybe strep throat, but they're never going to give me antibiotics because those darn internal medicine guys just tell me it's maybe viral. Right? Right. We think it might be an infection in your throat. We don't think it's all this other stuff. And it's Morgagni we can thank. I would ask you to remember Morgagni's name because he's the guy that deserves the credit for that. He's the guy that brought to light the fact that there's an organ basis of disease, that it's not just something wrong with the humors in your body, it's something wrong with an organ. Okay, that's the first guy. Bacon, then Morgagni, then John Hunter. This wild child, he was a feral child, poorly educated, no schooling, as opposed to his older brother, who was very prestigious and an internal medicine doc. This is how it typically goes. The internal medicine guys are the well-trained erudite guys, and the surgeons are the cutters like this guy. So William had this anatomy school in London, and he invited his little brother from Scotland, the wild child out running around and cutting off salamander tails, come and help me in London and be my dissector. Well, if you're running an anatomy school, what's the one thing you need? You need bodies. And John Hunter was really good at getting bodies. There's a part in London right near Hyde Park. It's really, really nice. It's some of the most expensive hotels you can ever stay at. The starting price is about $2,000 a night for their piece of garbage room. And it's right there where this famous Tyburn tree, this three-legged tree was, where hundreds and hundreds of people were hanged every year. And if you were getting hanged, there was one guy that was going to be snooping around, and that was John Hunter and his little band of brothers, because they were going to tackle your dead body and race away back to the anatomy school. He's the world's greatest grave robber, body snatcher, John Hunter. There's a lot of people that think that he is the model for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's the guy. He's also the guy that is said to be the inspiration behind Dr. Dolittle, because he had a house, quote, out in the country, which now feels like it's in the heart of London, where he kept all his ostriches and tigers and hippopotamuses, water buffaloes, leopards, lions. He had a crazy array of animals. He's the original Dr. Dolittle. But here in London, standing at this intersection, if you look down, there it is. This is the site of the Tyburn tree. Here's where the stands were built. Hundreds of people would come and watch the dirty guys get what was coming to them, and to watch John Hunter and his drunken group of medical students run away with their body. And or wait till you were buried. They had it down to seconds. They knew your head was buried toward the tombstone. They'd dig a little hole by the tombstone, break open the boards, grab you by the shoulders, and rip your body out and run back to their anatomy school and dissect your body. Pretty gruesome. He ended up doing, with his brothers, the anatomical dissections that figured out that the placenta, grown by the baby and completely encircled the baby. They did this dissection on a woman who was 9 months pregnant who died of an infection. They brought her in. I have this original manuscript. It's massive pages. It's shocking to look at. I hope I'm not shocking anyone too badly here. He's the guy that figured out that the way a fetus is inside. He's the guy that figured out the way that embryos were, and he did it through this. You would think someone would have done this before. He just took chicken eggs and kept breaking them open at different points, and he realized this is what a little chicken embryo looks like. And of course, in time, they realized it's kind of the same across all species. But things were gruesome back then. To me, this looks really scary. Digging up dead bodies. This is the way the surgeons were in the 1700s. And John Hunter's writings are shocking to read. He tasted everything. And he would write it up, and he would write that the gastric juices seemed kind of acidic. There's no fluid that he didn't taste. And he also wanted to know what syphilis felt like, so he intentionally gave himself syphilis by cutting his male member and spreading syphilitic chancre transudate on his wiener. And then he wrote about for the next year what it felt like to get syphilis. So he was obviously insatiably curious, our John Hunter. Surgeons of this day may not be any better in terms of being wild. But here was the medical school he went to, St. George's Hospital. And today, this is the Lanesborough. This might be the nicest hotel on planet Earth, the Lanesborough, right by Buckingham Palace. And it was here that he died after an argument, a physician's meeting in the emergency room. The doctors in this room have all been to crazy med staff meetings, but that's where he died. That's, that part of the revolution as well, of the first industrial revolution, of figuring out the organ basis of disease, John Hunter chasing after. He's really the first scientific surgeon. I think he gets an attaboy, at least for the syphilis experimentation. But he's really the father of scientific surgery, the guy to try and figure out how the body works, why disease happens, and is there anything we can do? When it came to him, there was nothing he could do, because back then, all they were abscess drainers.